see Celia Flores on the opposite side. That is Nicolas Maduro.
That is Nicolas Maduro. 3 days ago, the leader of Venezuela. And in front of him, Celia Flores, the powerful First Lady who once presided over her country's National Assembly. Today, they were shackled, taken from a Brooklyn detention centre by helicopter to iconic Manhattan. There, the parade carried on, in a performance choreographed by a US president who so often wants to present politics as if it were a reality television show. But there is no prize at the end of this, just the possibility of decades in jail on drugs charges. And then there is the small matter of who is running Venezuela.
Don't ask me who's in charge, because I'll give you an answer and it'll be very controversial.
What does that mean?
It means we're in charge.
Actually, Maduro's vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, is now officially in charge. But Trump says she'll pay a bigger price than her former boss if she doesn't give America what it wants. So what does Trump want?
We need total access. We need access to the oil and to other things in their country that allow us to rebuild their country.
What other things?
A lot of things. Roads that aren't built, bridges that are falling down.
But America has not taken hold of Maduro under the pretext of oil or infrastructure. It accuses this former world leader of enabling drug trafficking that it claims has flooded the US with cocaine. Maduro is facing 4 charges. Count 1 for narco-terrorism conspiracy, Count 2 for cocaine importation conspiracy, and Counts 3 and 4 linked to the possession of machine guns. The indictment claims Venezuelan leaders have corrupted institutions to import tons of cocaine into the United States, accusing Maduro of being at the forefront of that corruption, of providing cartels law enforcement cover and logistical support. His wife, Celia Flores, is accused of accepting bribes, while the US claims the couple ordered kidnappings, beatings and murders against those who owed them drug money. Inside court, Nicolas Maduro said he was a kidnapped prisoner of war, still president and innocent. His wife also pleaded not guilty. Many Venezuelans will cheer the downfall of a man they see as a dictator who stayed in power despite losing elections. But what about the US? If this case is really about America first, about saving American lives, it doesn't fully stack up. Fentanyl is the biggest drug killer here in the US, and it isn't even mentioned in the indictment because it isn't produced in Venezuela. And even with the cocaine, analysts say that taking Maduro out will not disrupt that trade. And yet, US pressure against Venezuela has been mounting for months, with strikes on boats in the region, then the arrival of warships. American spies entered the country before the land strikes at 2 a.m. on Saturday, as Maduro and Flores were snatched by US forces who had practiced on a replica compound for weeks. One Latin America expert argued that the motives of the US administration vary, with Trump clearly in it for the oil.
We're going to take back the oil that, frankly, we should have taken back a long time ago.
But for Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who has driven this forward, it's about regime change, ousting a socialist government in Venezuela before turning to a communist one in Cuba. Do you think they're going to achieve what they want?
I think probably Trump is the biggest winner in the sense that it is very likely that he will be able to gain some control on the oil industry, and that is something that he really wants. If what Rubio was hoping for was a return to democracy, this is not in the cards at the moment in any case, perhaps in the future, but not in the short term.
Nearby, the crisis led to a meeting of the UN Security Council, in which Secretary General Antonio Guterres said he was deeply concerned about the possible intensification of instability in Venezuela, and during which Russia and China condemned the US operation as illegal. Many see this as the start, not the end, of a more muscular America throwing its weight around the Western Hemisphere, seeking to reshape Latin America, a strategy that some believe will make it less respected but much more feared. In many ways, the Trump administration has been quite open about its motives here. They wrote them down in black and white in the national security strategy, the so-called Monroe Doctrine that you talked about, the idea that they're going to exert more influence in the Western Hemisphere, that they are the boss of the Americas. And we've seen it. Donald Trump told voters in Argentina, we'll give your country tens of billions of dollars, but only if you vote for my ally, right-wing Javier Milei, and they did in the midterms. Marco Rubio has been really open about the fact that ministers in Cuba should be worried now. The indictment mentioned other countries like Mexico and like Guatemala. But look, there are risks with all of this, risks on each of those motivations. In terms of the oil, Venezuela is likely to resist giving America more access to its oil. In terms of immigration, some in the White House think this will limit immigration, but if the UN Secretary General is right about instability, it could lead to more immigration. And then on democracy. Yes, there are protesters here who are happy to see Maduro go, but they didn't want to see his vice president take charge. They wanted to see the opposition in place.
Indeed. And Anushka, what about reaction in America?
Well, I think there are risks here in America too, starting with Congress. The Chief of Staff in the White House, Susie Wiles, recently did a series of interviews with Vanity Fair in which she said land strikes on Venezuela would require congressional approval. Well, you may have noticed they didn't get congressional approval before they went ahead with this. But there is also an issue here around the America First mantra, around the Make America Great Again MAGA supporters of Donald Trump, because one of the things that they didn't want in the past was more American foreign intervention, and this feels like a lot of foreign intervention, so it brings a political risk to Donald Trump as well.
Anushka in New York, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's talk more now about the legality of the US incursion into Venezuela and the charges against Nicolas Maduro. Here is David Cole, who is a law and public policy professor at Georgetown University and has joined us on a freezing roof. Thanks very much indeed. I mean, this is an extraordinary moment, isn't it, for America's power and influence in the region. Was the method of the abduction legal in international and American constitutional law?
Absolutely illegal under both international and American law.
Absolutely illegal.
Absolutely illegal. The first principle of international law is that one country cannot invade or attack another country except in self-defense, in response to an attack on it or an attack on its citizens. Venezuela has not attacked the United States. Venezuela has not attacked our citizens. If anyone has a claim to self-defense here, it's Venezuela, not the United States.
Right, and do you think that President Trump would have got that legal advice from someone in that building there but just doesn't care?
Well, he's surrounded himself by people who will give him whatever advice he wants, whether it's consistent with the law or not. But it's interesting that today, before the UN Security Council, the United States did not even argue self-defense. They did not even put forward a legal justification for what they did. They instead said Venezuela has a lot of oil reserves that we don't want to be controlled by their adversaries. So they're saying the quiet part out loud. This is not about self-defense. This is about control of oil.
It's about might is right as well, isn't it?
Well, absolutely. It's about disregarding the rules to show that we are strong. And we can do that because we're strong vis-a-vis other countries. But we do this to Latin America. We give an open door to Russia to go beyond Ukraine. We give an open door to China to go to Taiwan. You know, the laws are designed to stop exactly this kind of action.
Right, and laws have been broken before, but do you think that the way that the administration has handled this sets a dangerous precedent around the world?
Absolutely, because there really is no legitimate justification. In the past, the United States has gone into Central America in various places, but they've always had some justification, some claim of self-defense. Here, no real legitimate claim of self-defense whatsoever, and they're admitting that what they're doing it for is regime change and oil.
What about the claim that they're defending America from the drugs that are coming from Venezuela, poisoning American kids and killing American kids?
You know, American guns are going to Mexico and killing lots of people. Mexico can't bomb Smith & Wesson, a gun manufacturer here. American drugs are going to Canada. Canada can't bomb the United States because of that. So no, that's just not a justification.
Okay, what about, the method of the abduction was illegal in international and constitutional law. Does that in any way then dilute the government's argument against Maduro in a New York courthouse?
Well, I think the principal defense Maduro will have is head of state immunity, because there's a whole separate principle of international law which says that one country cannot put the head of another country on trial in its courts. And he's the head of state of Venezuela, whether you like it or not. He will invoke head of state immunity. That may be a defense. He will also probably argue that the abduction was illegal. That is unlikely to be a defense under American constitutional law. How you're brought to court doesn't really matter. But the fact that he's head of state may.
Okay, just briefly, I mean, this is the judge in New York was appointed by one President Bill Clinton. Is it possible that he might throw the whole thing out?
Anything is possible.
But unlikely.
I think it's unlikely, but we'll have to wait and see.
And of course, he didn't consult Congress. Does this show you that Trump basically rules without any congressional approval?
Well, I mean, we didn't need this to show us that.
Yeah, sure.
But yeah, it violates the Constitution because Congress, not the president, is supposed to authorize military force. The law requires him to notify Congress. He did not notify Congress. Congress did not authorize it, but he knows Congress is in his pocket because they're afraid of him. And so he's able to get away with what is essentially murder of a lot of people in order to engage in an illegal abduction.
Strong words said. Professor David Cole, thank you very much indeed. Well, back in Venezuela, Maduro's deputy, Delcy Rodriguez, has just been formally sworn in as acting president by the National Assembly. She's dialed down her criticism of Washington since Donald Trump warned yesterday that she would pay a very big price if she doesn't comply with his wishes. He's also threatened Colombia's president with military action, prompting a furious response from Bogota. Well, our international editor, Lindsay Hilsum, is in the Colombian city of Cucuta, on the border with Venezuela. Lindsay, over to you.
This isn't causing ripples across the region, but waves, a tsunami. President Gustavo Petro here did a long social media thing this morning where he hit back at both Marco Rubio and President Donald Trump. I am not illegitimate, he said. I am not a drug dealer. If you try and nab me, I will unleash the jaguar of the Colombian people. And then you have Cuba as well. 32 Cubans killed in the American raid because they were Nicolas Maduro's bodyguards and intelligence people around him. And then in Caracas, I don't think anybody's quite sure what's going on. As you said, Delcy Rodriguez is being sworn in at the moment at the National Assembly. Now, she was the deputy to Nicolas Maduro. She was seen as one of his closest allies. She was the oil minister as well as the vice president. But she doesn't really have any power. She's stuck between the Americans and the much more powerful men in the regime who control the guns, the head of the army and the interior minister who has the police and the colectivos. Those are the armed supporters of Nicolas Maduro. And those guys, they don't know what to do, so they do what they always do. Yesterday and today, they came out on the streets.
Don't worry, Maduro. The people are with you. To the supporters of ex-President Nicolas Maduro on the streets of Caracas, he's not a criminal facing trial, but a superman with a moustache and a hard hat. And his wife, Celia Flores, is superwoman. Slavery has been abolished in Venezuela. No to colonialism, she says. Her banner reads, "We want Nicolas returned." The sign, "We demand the freedom of Nicolas and Celia." He tries to rally the crowd with stories of support from fraternal nations. But the truth is, it's too late for such fantasies. The faithful repeat the tired ritual slogans, but haven't been a majority for many years. And now, after the American intervention, the regime, without Maduro, remains in office, but no longer in power. Deputies gathered at the National Assembly to witness the swearing in of the new president. Amongst them, Maduro's son, overcome by emotion.
And to you, Dad, you made all of us in the family strong people. We're here, fulfilling our duties until you return. The country is in good hands, Dad.
There was talk of freeing political prisoners as they waited for Delcy Rodriguez, once one of Maduro's closest allies, now his replacement. Venezuelans are trying to understand what's happened. American missiles hit some residential areas as well as military facilities. Most people were sleeping when the missiles came crashing through the window. Yet some blame not only the Americans, but also the regime.
This has to change, man, because we can't take it anymore. And I'm sorry, they can put me in jail if they want to, but it's like that. I'm talking about the actual reality of the country we have. What we want is a government that's good for all Venezuelans, not just a few.
On the streets of Caracas, they say the revolution started by Hugo Chavez, continued by Maduro, is not over. But it will take more than a few Kalashnikovs and smiles to change the new reality. But as Maduro's supporters roar around, no one knows what that reality is, nor what Donald Trump really wants from Venezuela and the remnants of its revolution.
And it's, of course, not just Venezuela and not just the region, because President Trump has also been once again threatening Greenland. That is part of the Western Hemisphere, the area of the world which he thinks that America should control, no matter that it is part of Denmark, no matter that it's part of NATO. He upped those threats again, and this, just in the last few minutes this morning, is what the Danish Prime Minister had to say.
I believe one should take the American president seriously when he says that he wants Greenland, but I will also make it clear that if the US chooses to attack another NATO country militarily, then everything stops, including NATO, and thus the security that has been established since the end of the Second World War.
There is great fear now across the world that President Trump means what he says, and in the words of an old song, you ain't seen nothing yet.
Lindsay in Qatar, thank you very much for joining us. Well, for more reaction inside Venezuela, I spoke to the journalist Mary Trinimina in Caracas earlier. She, like all of her fellow citizens, has to choose her words very carefully in public. I asked her, with Maduro's Vice President Delcy Rodriguez being sworn in as acting president today, how much has really changed there?
Yes, for many Venezuelans, it is a continuity because most of the people that remain in power in Venezuela are loyal to Nicolas Maduro. Delcy Rodriguez, which now is the president in charge according to the Supreme Court, it was a close ally of Nicolas Maduro, a member of the government. The new parliament is opening today in Venezuela, and the president of that parliament for the past 5 years is the brother of Delcy Rodriguez, Jorge Rodriguez. So it's significant because it are the same faces in the government ruling Venezuela without, of course, Nicolas Maduro.
And yet it must be very tense there on the streets. We're seeing reports of armed groups roaming Caracas. What can you tell us about that?
Well, yesterday, government supporters went to a demonstration and they were on motorcycles, some of them using weapons. But we need to remember that over the past few months, the government said that civilians should learn how to use weapons. They provided some of those weapons for training, and that was part of the militia. They created a civil militia, they say, to preserve the peace inside of the country.
The whole world is watching what's going on with you in Venezuela. I wondered what you made of the pictures of your former president in prison outfits, in handcuffs, being escorted into that Manhattan court.
Well, there are multiple reactions. For example, government supporters says that it's unfair that he was taken into custody in a foreign country, and with that attack on civilians and on military infrastructures inside of Venezuela, they say that was unfair, one part of the population. If you ask others Venezuelans outside of the country that left the country, some are celebrating. They feel that was correct, despite of the way that the operation took place. So it depends on who you talk to in Venezuela, if it is outside of the country or inside of the country.
I know you're obviously a working journalist, but you're also a citizen of the country. Do you personally look at those scenes playing out in Manhattan and feel shock, disbelief, or something else?
Well, it is unprecedented. I've been reporting Venezuela for more than 25 years. I've experienced many changes in the country. This is definitely a historic one. It's unprecedented, and especially the attack that we lived on Saturday. I never imagined that I would have the possibility to live as a citizen and to report something like that.
I mean, I know you have to be very careful about what you say, as everybody inside Venezuela does, but would you say the prevailing mood is one of hope or of fear now?
I think it's cautiously fearful. People in general are trying to look carefully what is going on and take one step at a time, one day at a time.
Mary Trinity Mina, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, joining me now from New York is Venezuelan opposition politician Freddy Guevara. He co-founded the Popular Will Party, a former opposition leader Juan Guaido, and has been in exile since 2021. Freddy Guevara, thanks very much for coming on the program. So when you look at your country, is it a case of the dictatorship is dead, long live the dictatorship?
Well, we believe that, of course, this is a big opportunity for us, but the job is far from being done. We Venezuelans are happy that Maduro is now facing justice. But of course, in order to make this a democratic transition, a lot of things need to happen, and that will require internal pressure, but also, of course, support from the international community.
Right. And how difficult is it going to be for the vice president who's just been sworn in to steer that fine line between pleasing or not aggravating Donald Trump any further, but also not alienating the people that she has to run the country with at the moment?
Actually, I think that what you're saying is the reason why I believe this is going to end well if everyone does what they have to do. I know her brother. I was involved in negotiations with them, and I can assure you that they're not moderate people. However, history is full of people from dictatorships that then contribute to some type of transitions, but they have to, play in this fine line in which I believe they're going to fail. And why do I say this? Because internally, everyone from the regime knows that they betray Maduro. It's clear now that she made a deal with the Trump administration, and in the eyes of many of them, they look as traitors. So while she has to comply with what President Trump is asking, she has to also keep betraying some of their allies. And I think this will create more and more tensions that will, sooner than later, open the path to a full democratic transition in Venezuela.
So yesterday we heard Donald Trump on Air Force One, and before that at his press conference, virtually throwing Maria Corina Machado, who won the Nobel Peace Prize, under the bus. Now, why do you think he's done that?
Well, I am not an interpreter of President Trump. I can tell you what I believe was intended. I think what he meant was not necessarily to the support of the Venezuelan people, because it's very clear that 90% of the Venezuelans voted for her in the primaries of the opposition. We chose her as her leader, and then we won with 70% of the votes in the general election. However, I understand that I believe that what President Trump said was referring particularly to the support that she could have within the structure of the Maduro's leftovers. So that's what I will say that he was referring to. However, we understand that also this is a very complex problem, and that it will require to play in these very fine lines that you were mentioning before.
Right. And how likely is it that these various factions within Venezuela that are protesting unity at the moment will fall out with each other, will battle each other in the ensuing chaos that might have been triggered by the president's abduction?
I believe they're going to dismantle it. They're going to start fighting with each other very soon. Today in the morning, we saw the brother of Delcy Rodriguez swearing as the president of the fake parliament that they had also in a fake election. But the person who was competing with him was the son of Nicolas Maduro, who has also said that his father was betrayed. So this is just the beginning of this situation that I'm pretty sure that will continue and will create more and more friction within the different factions of the regime, and if we add to that like the international pressure and the internal pressure will help us with this.
Just in one line, do you think that Delcy Rodriguez, who's now sworn in as president, betrayed ex-President Maduro?
Sorry?
Do you think that Delcy Rodriguez, who's now the president, betrayed her predecessor?
Yeah, for sure. I have no doubts.
Okay. Freddy Guevara, thank you very much indeed for joining us from New York there. Let's go back to Kathy in London. Kathy.
Thanks, Matt. Well, here, the Prime Minister is under growing pressure from his own MPs to condemn the US strikes on Venezuela and capture of its president. So Keir Starmer has been walking a political tightrope, keen not to damage the relationship he's carefully cultivated with Donald Trump. Today, he said it was for the US to justify its actions in Venezuela. Our political editor, Gary Gibbons, spoke to him earlier. He joins us now from Westminster. Gary.
Well, that pressure from Labour MPs you were talking about is on display in the House of Commons at the moment. The majority of Labour MPs who've got up and spoken so far, it's a statement by Yvette Cooper, the Foreign Secretary, have tended to lean in against the government and suggest that they would actually like to hear the government condemning what they very much see as an illegal act by Donald Trump in Venezuela. But as you say, Keir Starmer on that one is not budging. He's got a lifelong commitment to international law. He repeats that. He repeats that this country is committed to international law. But when you try and pin him down on whether Donald Trump has breached it, he doesn't go there. He says it's for the United States, as you said, to lay out its justifications. It's a testing moment for the hug them close approach of Keir Starmer. Don't dispute with him in public. But he has moved on the Greenland issue. You heard Lindsay Hilson playing that clip from the Danish Prime Minister saying Donald Trump should stop menacing Greenland as another acquisition that he talks about. And today, Keir Starmer, previously having been hesitant about that, weighed in and said, yes, I agree with the Danish Prime Minister. He should stop doing such things. Here are the exchanges we managed with Keir Starmer earlier. His team quite like him moving along a row of journalists rather briskly. But this is the exchange we managed to have. Some people might be puzzled listening to you say that you think America might not be in breach of international law over Venezuela. I can't find an international lawyer who thinks this is anything other than a blatant breach.
International law has to be the framework and the anchor, the benchmark, if you like, against which we gauge all actions of all governments across the world. It's important we don't lose sight of the substance here. The president was illegitimate, and the thing that we need above all else is a peaceful transition to democracy. That was the position of this government before the weekend. It remains the position of this government.
Donald Trump was asked about that just in the last few hours. He sounded much more interested in getting American oil companies into Venezuela in a hurry than he did in having democratic elections in a hurry.
Well,
that's the guy, isn't he? That's what he's like.
I speak for our government, and let me be absolutely clear that peaceful transition to democracy is the #1 priority in Venezuela. That's been our position before the weekend. It remains our position.
If you think it's not happening, and if you think he's breached international law, would you be willing to vote the other way on the UN Security Council?
Well,
from America?
The Security Council, there's no resolution drafted yet, so we haven't got into that space.
But in principle?
But I do think that it's important to just look in here at the substance of the issue. The president was illegitimate. It caused untold misery for people in Venezuela, and we need that transition to democracy, that peaceful transition. That, as I say, the position before the weekend remains our position.
But it's important also, isn't it, for countries like Britain to lay down red lines. Would it be a red line if President Trump decided to do the same thing in Cuba that he just did in Venezuela?
Well, the benchmark for this government will always be international law. The framework will be international law, and for the US or any government is for them to justify their actions.
As a red line, so people will say, actually, what you're telling those Labour MPs who are upset about this, international lawyers who are upset about it, is actually, I'm afraid we've got bigger fish to fry, on Ukraine particularly, and you just got to suck this up. We're not going to do much.
No, I'm not saying that at all. I've been absolutely clear. The framework is international law. I've been an advocate and argued for international law all my life.
Well, then this must offend you.
This hasn't changed. The situation is complicated. It's complicated even today. There's further developments in Venezuela. So the US will obviously have to justify the action that it's taken and is taking, but we mustn't lose sight of the fact that that peaceful transition to democracy is the single most important thing.
You must worry about the message this sends to Russia and China. They believe they can do what they like in their spheres of influence. That's been absorbing a lot of your time in the case of Russia. And he's doing the same thing in America, isn't he? Sending out an appalling message to those countries, isn't he?
Well, that's why, consistent with our allies, we are making the argument that international law is the framework, is the anchor, is the benchmark for any government around the world. And that remains the situation in Venezuela.
Thank you, Prime Minister.
Well, now, shares in major US energy firms rose sharply earlier after President Trump announced plans to take control of and revive Venezuela's oil industry. Oil prices were also up, even though such an intervention could exacerbate the current glut in the market. And despite Donald Trump's ongoing blockade, a number of oil tankers are reported to have left Venezuela in recent days. Our economics correspondent, Helia Ebrahimi, has been looking at what it all means for the global oil industry.
America's interest in Venezuelan oil dates back 100 years, and this chart about the world's top 10 oil reserves tells you why. The US, which is currently the world's biggest oil producer, is only ranked number 10, and analysts think its shale boom has already passed its peak. Kuwait, Iraq, oil-rich countries that have also been embroiled in controversial US military action, have around 100 billion, 145 billion barrels. Then you've got Saudi Arabia. But on top of all of this, you've got Venezuela with more than 300 billion barrels. That's about 20% of the entire world's oil reserves. But despite this vast wealth, oil production in the country has cratered, and so too has the economy, dragging down living standards by 2/3 over the last decade. At its peak, oil production in the 1990s produced more than 3 million barrels a day. Today, it's less than 1 million. And since Donald Trump's blockade in December, output has fallen even further. Trump's blockade has also stopped Venezuela getting its hands on chemicals it desperately needs for transporting oil, which it gets from Russia. And the conflict underlines a historic shift in the country's trading relations. The US used to be the main buyer of Venezuelan oil, but now it's China. In recent years, the country's oil exports have become harder to track, but like Iran, Venezuelan oil often passes through ghost ships. That's clandestine vessels that go ship to ship in cargo transfers to avoid sanctions. And almost all of it heads to China's Shandong province, where independent refineries known as teapots get it at a heavy discount.
We're going to have big investments by the oil companies to bring back the infrastructure. And the oil companies are ready to go. They're going to go in, they're going to rebuild the infrastructure. You know, we built it to start off with many years ago. They took it away.
So who are the American oil companies Trump's talking about, and are they really owed anything? In the 1990s, lots of global oil majors invested in Venezuela, like America's Exxon, Chevron, ConocoPhillips. But Hugo Chavez, Maduro's predecessor, nationalized the industry. This led to $60 billion of claims by commercial companies, with some money being awarded back to US firms. Chevron still operates a joint venture in Venezuela through a special license. But the oil infrastructure is currently in tatters, with oil rigs abandoned and spills unchecked and in the Orinoco Basin. And analysts at Rystad say it would cost $110 billion to simply bring production to where it was 10 years ago. But Venezuelan crude, super heavy and sour, as they call it, is what American refineries are chronically short of. Shares in Exxon, Chevron and ConocoPhillips were up today by about 6%. But the challenge and the cost for extracting Venezuelan oil is steep and complicated. Trump's obsession with cheaper oil prices and his disregard for climate change warnings show just how much oil remains king.
Helia on the oil and, of course, on the money. Now, if the Venezuelan attack means that President Trump plans to use hard power to expand his sphere of influence, what are the ramifications for the rules-based order? Not only did the operation contradict campaign promises to be a president of peace, it risks setting a precedent for China regarding Taiwan and, of course, for Russia in Ukraine. Trump has also threatened Iran, saying it'll hit very hard if it kills people taking part in the latest wave of anti-government protests there. He still has his eyes on Greenland, saying that the US needs the Danish territory for security. The Danes say the threats must stop, pointing out that existing agreements grant American forces access to the island. And then there's Panama and its crucial shipping canal, which President Trump wants to take back, accusing China of running it. And as you heard earlier from Lindsay, Colombia, whose President Trump has also accused of running drugs into the United States. Well, John Bolton served as National Security Advisor during President Trump's first term, but has become a very vocal Trump critic. He's currently facing federal charges over his handling of classified information, which he denies. I spoke to him a little while ago and began by asking how seriously governments should take President Trump's threats after what happened in Venezuela this weekend.
This is just Trump running his mouth. That's what he does. He's a man who brags. He takes delight in trolling people, as we say. And it's also part of his bargaining style to the extent you look back on his career.
So in the first Trump administration, when you served as National Security Advisor, you're on the record for saying that you wanted Maduro gone. So are you pleased with what has happened? And are you pleased in the way it was done?
No, because what we wanted was not just Maduro gone, we wanted the regime gone. And we did it in close cooperation with the legitimate interim president of Venezuela at that time, Juan Guaido, the leader of the opposition. Here, what has happened is obviously Maduro has been captured, but the regime itself remains. And amazingly, on Saturday, President Trump attacked the Nobel Peace Prize winning leader of the opposition and basically threw her under the bus. Trump is not, he's making a mess of the operation at this point.
Now, there is a report, and I wonder what you make of it, that one of the reasons why he threw Maria Corina Machado, who won the Nobel Peace Prize, under the bus, as you put it yesterday, is that she didn't hand the prize to him when she was given it. Now, do you think there's any credibility in that at all?
You know, with Trump, I think it's entirely possible. This is a man who does not have a small ego, but I think it's also because he enjoys dealing with, for whatever psychological reason, he enjoys dealing with authoritarians, and he thinks maybe having what's left of the Maduro regime in place, he can cut a deal on oil more easily. I think that's total fantasy. I think the regime right now is playing him by holding out the prospect of negotiation to talk to their allies, Russia, Cuba, China, and Iran, and to try and stabilize their position.
So when Trump claims that he's going to be running everything in Venezuela, what does that actually mean?
He has no idea what he's talking about. And you could see that as on Saturday, he referred back to the new viceroy of Venezuela, Marco Rubio, and the others behind him as being the committee that would run Venezuela, a proposition that Marco Rubio ran away from on the Sunday talk shows in this country.
Do you think that Marco Rubio, the son of Cuban immigrants to the United States, now Secretary of State, is behind this? Is he the driving force behind this, or is it Trump himself?
No, I give great credit to Rubio for convincing Trump to pay sustained attention to the threat that Maduro poses for the U.S. The instability in the Western Hemisphere that Maduro allows by having Russia, Cuba, China, and Iran operating out of Venezuela as a kind of base for their hemispheric operations. So Rubio, I think, was the moving force here. He hasn't moved it far enough, though. We've captured Maduro, but the rest of the regime is still there.
You know, you talked about trouble in the hemisphere, chaos in the hemisphere, troublemakers. I mean, does this make the hemisphere more stable because you've removed Maduro, even if his cronies are still in power? Or does it make it less stable because the result of all this could be chaos?
Well, I don't think it's going to be chaos in Venezuela. I think this is sort of propaganda that the White House is putting out because they know they haven't really removed the regime. I think this is just another example of Trump's utter lack of strategic thinking. He's making decisions and taking positions day by day. It's the indecisiveness, the incoherence of Trump's decision making that could lead to instability.
But even if there was a more coherent plan for regime change, why would anyone in this city contemplate that when the previous experience of American administrations in places like Iraq with regime change have been utterly disastrous?
I think you have to take each case on its own. I think in this instance, we've had clear experience with the Venezuelan opposition in country, not exiles, people in country who believe they have the capability of governing, and I think they're right. Look at what's in Venezuela today, and I think it shows why it is right to try and get rid of this regime and give the government back to the people of Venezuela. It's in U.S. national security interest to do it, and God knows it's in the interest of the people of Venezuela.
Ambassador Bolton, thanks very much indeed.
Thanks for having me.